Um, So today's workshop is going to be on the basics of blue teaming. I put a little caveat in there, being like more like logging and monitoring. Blue teaming is a whole category within information security, and it's a large one at that. Um, so I'm not going to be teaching you blue teaming per se. I'm teaching you a small subset of blue teaming, but you are not going to come away from this workshop knowing how to just blue team. That is something that will take a lot more time and patience to get to. Um, You'll notice that there are 3 authors on this workshop. I want to give a shout out to James and Jeremy. They put a lot of work into this workshop and helped me a ton over the last week to get this up and running. And I just feel very grateful for it. So they're equal authors to me, despite the fact that I'm the one presenting. I just want to make sure that that doesn't go unnoticed. Um, so on the screen right now, there's a QR code and also a bit.ly link. I've also put the bit.ly link in the chat. To be a full member of our club with full voting rights, you need to have attended at least half of the workshops. And we do this by taking attendance at each workshop. We need you to sign this to know that you were there. It's as simple as that. So if you would like to vote in our upcoming AGM, I really ask you to sign the attendance. This is a quick reminder and kind of amendment. The AGM will be happening on March 27th. This is when we will give you your candidates and go through just how our year has been, a little update about how our year and everything that we've done. And we will also open up voting that day. Voting will last for a week, and we will announce the winners of the those who've been elected into executive positions on the following Monday. So please fill out the attendance form because you never know when it's going to be the one workshop that pushes you over to getting voting privileges. It's the link is in the chat. I'm going to move on from this slide. I'm trying to ad lib to give you guys enough time to fill it out. So 3, 2, 1, moving on. So I'm going to get into our workshop. I'm going to try and keep this under 2 hours as hard as possible. So Red Team, a lot of you guys may have heard of Red Team. We may have said the word in one of our many workshops in our club or in our Discord chat, or you can hear people talking about it possibly. If not, I'm going to give a quick rundown on what it is because it's important to understand so you can understand what the difference is in Blue Team. So Red Team is the offensive security experts who try and attack an organization's cybersecurity defenses. Sorry. This is largely what our club does. Red teaming comes almost hand in hand with CTF events and penetration testing and games like Hack the Box. It's those skills that those events are trying to like cater to essentially. And red teaming is the people who are offensive. They're actively attacking systems. It's typically more fun. It's typically how people get into information security. It's quite lucrative. But it is not all of information security. And that's what I'm trying to present today because us as a club have focused on it quite a bit in the past. So the blue team is someone you might have not heard of or have no idea what they do. So I want to get a little into what they do today because as I said, this workshop is not all encompassing. It won't tell you everything that there is to know about blue team. So who is the blue team? The NIST definition on the NIST website says the group responsible for defending an enterprise's use of information systems by maintaining its security posture against a group of attackers. That's a very long definition with big words, which makes it hard to get through and understand. Essentially, all you need to understand is that the blue team are the defenders. They're the ones that are protecting a company's infrastructure. Flick that through that a little too fast. Its infrastructure, its assets, all of its computers, servers, Wi-Fi, things that are on the network from attackers. That is like the really, really broad definition of what a blue team does. They defend. That being said, blue team is not a title. You don't go work in, you might, but typically you do not go work into a blue team section of a company, there are tons of different security titles that cover this. You could be a security analyst, you could be an incident response, you could work in threat intelligence, security operations, DevSecOps, malware analysts, forensics, system administration, network analysts, cloud security. These are just the ones that were on the top of my head. There are several um, positions that work in Blue Team, but these are just, sorry, I have hiccups. The ones that I thought of when I made this slide. What I want to get across, like the point that I want to get across, is that the majority of security jobs do not lie in hacking, but they actually lie in defending. A large reason why our club started out in hacking and in red teaming and penetration testing is because it helps to think like a hacker to be able to defend against it, but the end is not hacking always. It's often to get to the defense section. So tasks of blue teams, I've put a lot of acronyms in here, which sound or like look scary and crazy, and also just like arbitrary words and things. Most of them don't matter. They're just it's just meant to serve the use of like exposure so you guys can see possibly what blue teams might do. So the three big acronyms that are the first three on the slide are S bombs, F bombs, and H bombs. Um, these are just acronyms. They stand for software bill of materials, firmware bill of materials, and hardware bill of materials. I also have a cat trying to get into my screen. Um, Basically, what those mean is just inventory. What do you own and what are you actively trying to protect? Because it seems simple and like common sense and like it would already be done, but most companies don't actually even know what they're trying to defend, what they own, what is on their network. So that is a first task of a blue team in a big fancy acronym. But they also work on security rules, detection, incident response, bug patching, system updates. They might try and pass audits, which is a whole world in itself, and governance and risk. The 11th number on that slide is logging and monitoring, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So logging and monitoring bleeds over into all of these other areas, but it's its own section in itself, and you can get good at it in itself. So logging and monitoring. So logging tells you what happens and gives you the raw data to track down that issue. Log files encompass activities across servers, applications, systems, etc. They're the meat of what logging and monitoring is. And system logs, also the meat, are a record for a specific system or application. So these are very academic definitions, I guess I would say. And you're going to see a really terrible view right now. Forgive me. I only have one major screen. But they're not scary. So I'm going to open my terminal. I'm actually running this whole thing locally. I'm not on a Kali, but it is a Linux, and I will explain the parts that differ. But you should be able to do this on your Kali machine, or if you have a Linux machine. If you have a Windows or Mac, it won't necessarily be quite the same. Mac will be very similar. Windows does not let you by default see logs, to my understanding. So logs sound like a scary concept, but your computer actually has them, even though you probably never knew it. So I've opened up to my terminal. I'm going to increase the terminal size so you guys can see, but I'm just in my home directory. If I navigate to /var, so the var folder of your root, and I want to look in there, there is a directory called log. If I navigate into that and see what comes up, there are already logs just default on my system. This is because most software, especially most modern software, um, there are strong like practices within development that require people to log. Logs can be error messages, warning messages, security issues, or just it shows you what's happening on the software at the time. So I'm going to cat out because I think it's the most easily understandable. The Pacman log, you'll see that right here. So I'm on Manjaro, which is a little different than Kali or Ubuntu or maybe Linux distributions you might be familiar to, and it's definitely different than Windows and Mac. But Pacman is a package manager for Arch. So it's similar, like the thing that is the same on Ubuntu and Kali, for example, is apt. So you can install things using this. On Mac, it could be Homebrew, and Windows has package managers, but they're not common to use. So you might have never used them if you only use Windows. So if I cat out pacman.log, what you can see is it's just a bunch of text. It's not scary. It's just a bunch of text pretty much being printed to a file and just sent there, and these are the things that are going on. So this is just telling me all of the different things that my package manager has tried to install, softwares that it's building. Your package manager often builds the softwares for you so you can run them, updates, and it's just straight up telling me what happened. It gives me a timestamp of when this happened and a message. It's what I'm trying to get at here is like logs are not scary. They are just files and you have them and you have probably never looked at them. I don't regularly look at my own system's logs because there's no point. I do agree. We should have more girls in cybersecurity. um, that was just an aside. Um, so that's what logs are. Now, what's monitoring? Monitoring tells you how your application is behaving and can alert you to issues. So as I said, I don't regularly look at my laptop's logs. There's no real reason for me to, although I guess if you're security minded, there is reason for me to. People could be trying to get into my own system. But on a larger scale, on like in like enterprise or businesses, that's not going to slide because people do actively try and attack Google, or they do break Google all the time. Um, and so someone needs to be aware of that happening, and you do that through monitoring. So I'm going to get into our first challenge. And I'm going to ask you all to download the file at our website. I'm going to paste the link in the chat so you don't have to copy that down. But I'm asking you all to download this static file. It's a log file from one of the machines that we are running today. I actually pulled it from it before I started doing other things. And I want you all to answer the question, what is happening on this machine? And I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to do that. This is not a flag, it's just to start understanding what's going on. I'm going to flip back to the link in case people need to see that, but I'm going to give you 2 minutes starting now. All right, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time, but since there's a little bit of delay between my stream um, and your guys' viewing of me, I'm going to ask, what do you guys think is happening on this machine? All answers are valid. I know I gave you no time to look through that. I just wanted to get you guys searching through it and looking around, essentially. I now get to sit around and kick rocks while I wait for the lag to catch up. um, this is close. Someone SSH'd into the system and created a root user. Um, unfortunately, there are 2 logs in there that I didn't mean to get. That final SSH is actually me. Um, essentially, what has happened is an SSH brute force attack. You might have noticed there are tons and tons of invalid logs coming through. I pulled up my terminal but didn't switch my screen. Sorry for the awful view. So I have challenge1a.log in here. If I cat it out, we can see that there are tons of random usernames trying to SSH in, and it is an invalid user. So that user doesn't exist on this system. There's no way they ever could have got in, essentially. I will apologize. This final one is actually me SSHing in to get the logs, so I could show you guys for this workshop. But for your guys' first official challenge today, the question is, what is the most common username that fails to SSH into the machine? So normally in our workshops, if you guys have been here before, we will hide flags within our challenges, and they will start with UCSec, open curly brace, close curly brace, and have leet speak in between. Due to the nature of this workshop and the fact that you are just looking in text files, I haven't hidden any flags directly. However, Orchid does have flags. So there is an answer. It's just the username, and I would like you to put that in between the UCSec tagline, and you can submit it to Orchid that way. This will give you the flag. For anyone who's new and maybe hasn't been in our club before, if you join our Discord server, we have a bot named Orchid. If you DM her, you can submit flags. I keep not switching my share like I'm a professor. So this is Orchid. You can find her in our server under the text channel Orchid. If you DM her with a flag, she will tell you whether or not, she will tell you if the flag is right. She will say nothing if the flag is wrong and give you points on our leaderboard. And again, you will have to put our flag today in this challenge into the UCSec flags. So my hints are try Linux commands like grep along with the different flags that grep has. If you need help, you can man grep to try and figure out what commands it does have. So again, the challenge is, what is the most common username that fails to SSH into the machine? And I will give everyone 5 minutes. I just wanted to pop in at about the 2:30 mark and talk about a Linux command that might help, it might not, which is called WC in Linux. It should be pre-installed on any Linux machine that has things. It doesn't like that. WC stands for word count, and it will count the number of lines in a file. So if I go, sorry, it will count the number of words in a file. I can't remember 100%, but I used a flag to get through this challenge. That might help you paired with grep. So you can also man WC if it's something that you think will help. All right. Some people have been mentioning in the chat, this actually made me feel very good because someone said I just grepped the user and inputted the one that I saw the most. That was kind of intentional by my part. I was hoping it would be obvious, but if it wasn't, I apologize. Essentially, um, I cheated. I already knew the answer because I made the challenge. So it was hard to see what it would be like from your guys's. But if you wanted to do this outside of Linux, you could write a Python script. That would quickly, you could write a bash script, you could write any language script that just opens this files and looks through. This is a Python script that that James created that looks through the log and pulls out each user with the number of times they appear next to invalid. Um, this is pretty quick and dirty. It prints a whole dictionary object, which isn't the nicest view, but it does do the work. What I did is, as I said, I grepped the word invalid user since we're looking for the user that failed the most in the challenge log, but I piped it through that WC command. A pipe sends the input from that grep into the next command, so you can chain commands over with the same input with the TAC-L flag. The TAC-L flag in WC counts how many lines come out of that output, and since each log is on one line, it just is essentially counting the amount of users who failed to log in. That's 156. I then grepped for a couple of other users I saw in the file. So I grepped invalid user with James. That comes up with 3. So he's failed to log in 3 times. I grepped admin. The admin has failed to log in 1 times. But if you grep Ren which comes up the most with that wc tac-l command, it finds 75 lines, which is almost half. I think I did the math and it was 48%. It's almost half of the failed login attempts. So with that, the answer is UCSec, open curly brace, close curly brace, but Ren in the middle. And you can submit that to ORCID for points. So I do have another question, which is, what is the problem with parsing logs this way? Could you foresee any issues that you would run into? And I'm going to kick my feet again as I wait for you guys to answer with all of the lag. I like this answer. It's slow as heck. That's that has the same vibe of what I was going for, of this being incredibly tedious and not helpful. So my answers were, it gets overwhelming really fast. If you were anyone looking at more than one log, this can get very overwhelming. Jeremy says it's too much fun. I will pull that up. I disagree. So number two, it only spots, you can only spot an error or an attack if you happen to be looking. We have to happen to go look into this log and notice that something weird is going on. Typically, this may look normal. There might not be constant brute force attacks happening. And you can only retroactively respond to attacks. You only can know that an attack happened way after it happened, possibly, unless you manage to look at exactly the right time and you notice them coming in. But that's not likely. So it's not actually a really good way to look through logs, and it's not typically how real companies look through logs. So the solution to that is a log management system. And a log management system is a software solution that gathers, sorts, and stores log data and event logs from a variety of sources into one centralized location. So the graph or the diagram, I guess, that I have on the slide is one that if you get into this and you start understanding logs, pretty much every log management system has their own version of this graph with their own pieces plopped in. But if you think about it from maybe a much larger organization's perspective, they might have, even for a small company, they might have 10 web servers, like they might have 10 servers. Each of those servers is creating its own logs because they happen inside the machine. Each of our laptops have their own unique logs because different things are happening inside of them. If you wanted to look at all of those the ways that we just did, you would have to somehow SSH inside of those machines and then go into var/logs and then manually run Python scripts or bash scripts or some kind of program against all of these logs and hope that you find the thing that you were looking for. You probably would never notice anything weird that was out of line with what you expect because you wouldn't be actively looking for it. And it's just really slow and tedious. The idea of a log management system is to pull all of those logs into one computer or one web page so you can look through it that way. It also gives you the opportunity to search through them through something a little more sophisticated, which I'm going to show. So I've added these slides into our streaming service weird, and I wanted these to be animated. But basically, the point of this slide is to get across that there are many log management systems. If you look up log management system right now, there are lists that like rank the top 50. I have two things to say about that. One, any list is just someone's opinion. You know what? They're all good and bad for different reasons. There's no this one is the best. There are better ones for sure. But they're all good and bad for different reasons. And I actually like a lot of them. So on this page, I have 4 written. The one on the very bottom underneath is the ELK stack, which I'm going to show to you today. So I won't say too much about that right now. The next one is Prometheus, Grafana, and Grafana Loki. which if you participated in Magpie CTF a couple weeks ago, that's actually the logging and monitoring service we used within um, Magpie CTF. I quite liked it. It's quite good. Next up is Splunk. This is one if you are talking to people about log management systems that may come up. Splunk has been falling out of favor with many companies, but it is quite good and it does service enterprise level, so whole organizations or businesses that are quite big. And the one on the very top is one that I have experience with within companies. It's Datadog. Datadog is quite liked, to my understanding, but it's expensive. You have to pay for it. It's very expensive. Both Splunk and Prometheus, Grafana, and Loki have Prometheus, Grafana, and Loki is free to a certain extent, and Splunk has a free tier. Datadog does not. So it's nice, but it's pricey and that's the con. But today we're going to be talking about the ELK stack. So we're going to get into what the ELK stack is. Feel free to ask any question at any time. This might get very confusing and it might be a lot of information all at once. I've tried to mediate that, but never never fear to or never be concerned to stop me and ask questions. So the important thing that I wanted to convey in this slide is that the ELK stack is a stack. It's, depending how you look at it, 3 to 4 softwares stacked on top of each other. It's made up of um, Elasticsearch, Logstash, occasionally Beats, and Kibana. And they stack on top of each other and integrate with one another to make the big log management system. So I talked about that centralized graph earlier and how you're going to be seeing a lot of them as you get into log management systems. This is an example of one. So this is in theory how the ELK stack works. I just wanted to show it and I'm going to get into each piece and then I'll talk about it later. But you can see these are the beats that I talked about. This is Logstash, this is Elasticsearch, and this is Kibana. They interact with each other in specific ways. And then these 3 services are imaginary web servers. So there's an Apache instance, there's an Nginx instance, and there's a Node.js web server. So these are all websites running somewhere on some machine that we need to log what's going on in. So I'm going to start with Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is the original Elastic product. If you've heard of the Elastic company, this is what they originally started out making. It's open source with a caveat. I'll get to that later. And it's a search and analytics engine for all types of data. It's a NoSQL database, which if you've taken 471 at U of C, the databases courses, you might be familiar with SQL databases. This is just a slightly different query language. Don't get too bogged down by it. And also, if you've never heard of any of these SQL or NoSQL databases, also don't worry. It's not going to hinge too far on that. And it provides an API that you can ping to if you want to ask things about the data it's able to search through, a web interface, which is super helpful, and it also parses things through JSON documents. Logstash is, again, another open source software. It was originally designed as standalone, so it would pull logs from multiple sources and streamline them into one format. If you think about how logging works within software, it's essentially a developer makes some product. They make SSH, which is super low level, but they make SSH and they decide how they're going to output their logs to those log files. But a different software like Nginx might choose to make it in a slightly different format. You can imagine if you're trying to search through that, that's a mess. That's not good. So someone has put in a lot of time and effort to make a program that fixes that. And it essentially puts them into JSON format that's predictable and that a search engine could predict what it would be looking for. Logstash has not been favorable for a while because it requires JVM, which is a Java virtual machine, which means it's incredibly memory intensive. The server that I'm running our own ELK Stack on right now that we're using for this workshop is very big because of that. And occasionally, more often than not, ELK is quite slow because of that. Uh, People don't love it because of that. It's also the reason that beats came into existence. Um, so I call it the ELK Stack because ELK can run without beats, but it doesn't run efficiently without beats. So beats run the lumberjack protocol, which is what um, log stash shippers originally ran. Um, it's called that because it chops up logs into smaller digestible pieces, if you wanted a pun. um, and beats are basically lightweight agents installed on different servers in your infrastructure for shipping out those logs and metrics. So you have 10 servers and they're putting SSH auth.logs on them. They have auth.logs on them. You want to send those somewhere else so you can look at them from one machine. The one that we will be looking at today is called FileBeat. There are 7 different kinds of beats, and they all ship different types of logs. FileBeat specifically ships just text files in the way that I gave you a file log and you were able to read it. That's what FileBeat does. There are other ones. There's MetricBeat. I'm going to rattle them off at the top of my head, but I don't know them for sure. There is MetricBeat, which ships machine metrics. So if your CPU is really high, you might want to learn about that. Or if your memory is really low, that's something you might want to know about. There's PacketBeat, which ships network statistics. WinLogBeat, I mentioned how Windows logs are very specific and different. They have very nice logs. They're hard to access, so it needs its own beat for that. There is FunctionBeat, which ships cloud data. Heartbeat, which checks if machines are up. There are basically a ton of beats, and they all do their own thing. Today, we're only going to be worried about FileBeat. The final piece of the ELK stack is Kibana. So Kibana is also open source with a caveat, which I will get to later. And it's a data visualization and exploration tool. It was originally also built as a standalone tool and is now integrated into ELK. So it essentially allows you to take that log data and turn it into bar charts, heat maps, graphs, something that would help you like look at it and understand what the data means rather than having to read through those logs. So I want to bring it back to this diagram again, now that you've understood maybe a little bit of what these pieces do. So we have beats, in our case file beats, running on each server. They are sending whatever logs they are able to access to Logstash, which takes those logs and ingests them in such a way that it makes them unified. They will all hold the same format. They'll have the timestamp at the same spot, the message at the same spot, so it's predictable, which then ships those predictable logs to Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is the database, if you might remember, so you can make queries in Elasticsearch and try and figure out what logs match what. Kibana might make queries on that Elasticsearch database in order to visualize and make graphs and bar charts. So that is how that stack works together. Before I move forward, I'm going to take a minute and ask if anyone has any questions. Emily is making fun of the acronym with beats. It's technically ELBK, but I only recently learned that. Most people understand what you mean when it's you just say ELK. You get used to them. I think the important thing to understand about industry terms is they don't mean anything special. People say them and they sound super smart. They don't mean anything crazy or weird. And I apologize if I'm speaking in too many of them. That's actually something I should work on. So I want to take a minute. I've spent the whole week doing nothing but ELK, um, but I also have previous experience with some other logging management systems. I have some opinions about ELK essentially, and I'm going to place those forward because you guys gave me a platform. Um, so the cons of ELK are it's bulky and it takes a ton of space to run. I mentioned how it runs JVM, Java Virtual Machine. One of the cons of the language Java is it's not good on space, and this really pushes forward here. This makes ELK quite slow. Um, Additionally, because ELK is almost four completely standalone softwares stacked onto each other in the stack, it has a complex setup, and there's a lot of configurations that you can make with it and that you have to make for it to work together and work with how your machine is running. We did this. The machines I'm running are very simple because I didn't want to fight so much with figuring out these configurations and everything about it. On the other hand, it is a good software. It is really used, like tons of people use it. So the pros are it's open source. Um, and it was also, I think, one of the first open source logging management systems that really held a name for itself. Because of that, there's tons of documentation on the internet. You can search most things, how to do X on ELK Stack, and there will be a Medium blog or an article about how to do it, which is very helpful. It's also quite modular. I talked about how there's several kinds of beats, which are those log shippers. So you can decide which ones you do and don't want. I don't have a lot installed because I didn't need them. But if you needed more installed, you could. And the pro is it's highly configurable because everyone has different use cases for this software. And it's nice to be able to decide exactly what you need if you understand it very well. So I want to talk a little bit about querying. So I want to bring up this slide from earlier. Elasticsearch is a NoSQL database. Um, don't worry if you don't know what a NoSQL database is. What this means is we're actually able to query um, data that it has the way that you would make requests to any database. If you've used MongoDB, that's a NoSQL database. Um, but I'm going to show you why it might not matter if you aren't familiar with this. I'm going to paste a link in the chat, but it's also the link that's on the screen. Um, this is our ELK stack. Make sure that you're going to HTTP. If you're using a Chrome browser, it likes to force, also Firefox does this, all browsers like to force you to go to HTTPS, it will fail. And make sure that you're going to the port 5601. You'll see that on the end. And I've made 4 users for people to sign in. I'm going to give you freedom to choose which user you sign in yourself. But you can sign into any of these users. All of their passwords are ka. And we can start looking around, essentially. But I'm going to give everyone a little bit to type in the usernames and passwords. I do want to note you have a little bit of power with these users just based on how I did the workshop. I wanted you to see all that, or not all, some of what ELK could do. It from a view where you were a little more privileged, but that does mean you can mess around with it. All I ask is you please don't. We're trying to learn. This is for a purpose. Please don't destroy the infrastructure. Um, thank you. I will tell a funny story of all of this infrastructure is technically vulnerable, and people do just try and attack IPs they find on the internet all the time. Um, and someone, when I was using the default password, did get in and was making it so my workshop wouldn't work, and I thought it was me, but it was a person. And we had to tear it down and kick them out. Okay, so you guys, once you log in, should be able to see this screen. It might yell at you if it about a secure. It thinks it's in production and I haven't set it up for production. Ignore that if that happens. But basically, there are 4 big screens that it wants you to look at. Enterprise search, observability, security, and analytics. I'm going to, you could probably do it from this, but I'm going to go into the top left hamburger bar and scroll down to observability. I struggle with that word, and then go into logs. This gives you what is known as a live feed. So it's live of all of the logs running on the system. There are 3 servers running that are shipping logs to them. Additionally, they are vulnerable endpoints. So you can see random people. You'll see here, someone is trying to get a web shell in my server. I don't think they can, but that is a thing that is happening. Sorry about that. So I'm going to move through the slides and I will probably show you twice just because it's a lot to digest of everything that you need to do. So we can select that hamburger bar and then under observability, we can select logs. This will give you a live feed of all the logs. Something to note, occasionally, for some reason that's unbeknown to me, it will tell you there are no logs available. Usually if you do a hard refresh, it just fixes it. So Control-Shift-R or click the refresh button on the top of your page usually fixes it and will just solve any problems. It does happen sometimes. So on the screen, I wanted to show you about what you're actually looking at. So you are getting all of those logs from all the 3 different machines shipped to this one point. Those logs, as I said before, have been put through Logstash so they can be sorted into an organized, consistent log format. So on your farthest left, there's a timestamp of, I believe, when ELK got the log. It's not the same as when the log was ingested, and this will matter for a later challenge. But it's when ELK got the log and was like able to see it. This means it orders it. You'll notice the top of the screen is the oldest logs and the bottom of the screen is the newest. That's a little counterintuitive to me, but okay. The next to the farthest left is called the event data set. This is the source that it's pulling those logs from. So we were able to see SSH logs earlier. I had just given you the log file. Because ELK and Beats are quite smart, they have modules to sort all of the log files into something that it can understand, and it wants you to tell it what its source is. So I have configured the file be in such a way that it knows it's getting certain logs from the system auth, so SSH. Sometimes they say Nginx. That's because I've also configured an Nginx module for a lot of them. And then the next big part of the log is the message. This is because all logs are different fundamentally from each other. And so the message is just everything else that the log might contain. I'm going to do this physically because it makes more sense. So I'm going to switch my screen share. So this is our logs. You can stream live. The stream live is a little buggy, but it's supposed to be propagating new logs as they come. So these are the oldest logs, and it did the thing. Because it's Java, it is a little slow. Someone has switched us to dark mode, but that's fine. It will just look slightly different. So we can see this is an SSH log from someone. If we view the details, so to go over that again, I moused over the log and you can click these 3 buttons and then click view details. And this will give you more information about the log than it's displaying on that live feed because it has a ton of information. It's sorted these. So if we scroll down, we can see the timestamp of when ELK actually got the log. We can see the agent type that actually collected that log. So I told you guys that FileBeat is running. That is the one that pushed the log to our main server, and even the agent's version number. Event action, it's an SSH login. It sits in the category of authentication. We can also see that the outcome of the event is that they failed. We know that they didn't manage to log in. It gives you a bunch of information like the file path of where the log came from, the server it's running on. I have vuln droplet 1, vuln droplet 2, vuln droplet 3. They kind of organize into the challenges. So you'll be able to see them. But you will be able to see the user that they tried to SSH in as. So they tried to SSH in as just user, and where they're from, or at least where their IP claims they're from. It might not be the same. So we basically get a ton more information if we click on these this way. So that's what this is trying to say. For this upcoming challenge, one thing I do want to reiterate is there are a bunch of different timestamps that all mean different things. The main timestamp, to my understanding, it might not be true, is when ELK got the actual log. There is another kind of timestamp, which is this Suricata event timestamp. This is what you're looking for in the next challenge as a hint. That is when I think the event propagated on the actual machine. So as I said, it might be coming from Russia. These are just open droplets. I didn't run those logs. Someone else is trying to get into these machines. And so there's nothing I can do about that. They're going to try and attack me. And that's what's happening, essentially. And so we just managed to look at one that is actually a real attacker. But later we will see they're coming from all over. So building a query, we can query with this page, and as I said before, it's technically NoSQL, but we don't have to worry too much about that because this is made for people, for ease of use, essentially. They have worked really hard into creating autocomplete and dropdowns into building a query. So if you type a letter in on that query bar, it's going to try and search through everything that matches. So I typed in A and chose agent type. You can literally click on it and it will autocomplete in the search bar. I will show this soon. It then gives you every option that could logically come after this query. So there is a colon, which stands for equals. They also have a colon, which is like any agent type, star in computer science. If you haven't made it this far yet, it's a second year course where you will learn this. Stands for like every 0 or more things, but everything. It includes all agents essentially. We could put an and condition in or an or condition. And also at the bottom, you'll notice it has my previous searches or my previous queries as an autocomplete. So I selected the colon, which means equals. So agent type equals, and then it again gives me every possible thing. Since the only thing the agent type could be, because the only agent that is running on any of my machines is FileBeat, that is the only option it gives us. And we are able to search with that. I'm now going to switch my screen and do that for you physically, but this time in dark mode. So if I type agent or I just type A, I can scroll down through this and find agent name. Again, it gives me all of the possible options. So I'm going to click colon and then FileBeat. It doesn't like that. I'm just doing a little sanity check for myself. FileBeat does exist. Oh, I did agent name. That's what I did. And then file beat. And if I search this, it will come up with all of the logs that were pulled from the agent type of file beat. So I think in theory, this would be all of them. It might not be, but these are all the logs that relate to file beat. I verify the query here as I did just earlier. You can click on any of those logs again and get the more detailed view of what the log actually contains, and you can confirm that now the agent types are file beat. So my second challenge is at what time, according to Elasticsearch or this live feed, was the first login attempt was the first login attempt by the user May Gelsworth made? So as I said earlier, just as a quick reminder, I am looking for a specific timestamp. I am looking for the one that starts with S. This Suricata event timestamp. That is the one that I am looking for in that question. So at what time, according to Elasticsearch, was the first login attempt made by the user May Gelsworth? Again, this is a different type of flag, so you can just put that timestamp into the UC-sec brackets and you should be able to submit it to ORCID and get the flag. I'm going to give you guys 10 minutes, but I'm going to check in at 5 minutes to see how things are going and if people have all completed it. If they have, we will move on. And my hint here is try using the queries to filter the logs as I just showed. All right, you have 5 minutes. I just wanted to hop in and possibly give a little hint to move some people along so they can notice something. Um, you can look for SSH events, and that might push you along. So there's a type called system.auth.ssh event that might help you query the right user. As well, if you get the flag, always let us know in chat. It just helps us time some things in case a ton of people have the flag and we're just sitting here waiting for another 5 minutes. So always let us know when you get the flag because we love to hear it. You guys have 5 more minutes. Someone asked where the flags are being entered, and I will take this to spend the last 2 minutes. We have a bot named Orchid in our Discord server. Um, I can try and get a link. You'll have to watch me get a link. In our Discord server, you can find her in hashtag Orchid. She's our bot. You can DM her flags. So if you DM her a flag, she will tell you something. If it is a flag, she'll tell you how many points it is. If it's not a flag, she'll probably just say nothing. So yeah, that is who you give flags to if you want points. There's a leaderboard in our club. And you can get to possibly the top of this. I'm going to try and get the link to our Discord server real quick. There. With that, I'm going to move on to the solution. So if you didn't get it, we'll catch you back up. It's all okay. So my intent was to query the database. That just shows you the answer, so I'm going to do it myself. So I talked about how there's a system auth SSH event. This is what I used to get it. Someone pointed out you could probably just query the name. I didn't really think of that, but that's also totally valid. um, in a similar way to how I was grepping for invalid SSH attempts in the physical log that I gave you guys, I am doing the same thing here. I'm grepping for invalid and, sorry, there's a cat now. User name text, which is a field that exists in those SSH logs, equals May Gelsworth. And if you scroll up to the top of when her first attempt was, you can go to the side and view details and scroll down to, as I said before, that Suricata event timestamp and put that into the UCSec, and that's the flag. So just to reiterate, I am using the query to find those same invalid events and also finding the username.txt of May Gelsworth. If I actually look into the details of one of those logs, you'll see at the very bottom, there's user.name and user.name.txt. I chose the .text one because we don't actually know if this is true, but I believe that the .text is a string version of May Gelsworth instead of whatever the actual object is. This will be important later, but as Dr. Aycock would say, strings are nice. They play nice. So you always want things to just be strings or text that's like not a special kind. So with that, you have the flag, and we can move on. So at this point, you might be saying, I feel like I haven't learned anything. All you've given me is fancy grep, which might be true, the way that it seems so far. But that's not true about the ELK stack. So now I'm going to move on to dashboards and visualization. I said earlier that dashboards and visualization are what Kibana does on the ELK stack, and we can actually use these to visualize our own data. So if we want to get to the Kibana section of the ELK stack, per se, you can go back to that hamburger bar on the top left corner and select dashboard under analytics. And I tried to make sure that all the users' permissions were correct, but please let me know if you can't see these for some reason. I would need to know. So on the dashboard page, you can select create a dashboard. It's a little plus sign with a blue button on the top right. There's also a ton of pre-configured dashboards. I don't think any of them work because I didn't configure them to work. So there are theoretical dashboards that exist that don't work for our purposes. You would have to do some extra configuration, I believe, on the FileBeat side to get those to run. So select create a new dashboard. And then we are able to start creating a dashboard. I'm going to actually do this myself and talk about things this way. So again, go up into the hamburger bar in the top left, and then under analytics, there should be something called dashboard. We can then go to create dashboard. And then we get to this page, which is where we actually create the dashboard. Select create visualization. And then we get here where we can do things. I'm going to make an example dashboard to show you guys how it works before we move on to our next challenge. So this has already been done for me, but if it hasn't, up in this kind of top left corner below the search function, there is something called a data view. Data views, according to Elastic, are ways that they group different the data that they're being sent. So in our case, we set up a data view to group all FileBeat logs. So all logs that were sent by FileBeat are grouped into the FileBeat-star data view. In theory, to my understanding, if you wanted to be more complex with it, you could group logs by the machine that they're coming from, or maybe by just the application, like group all Nginx logs, if you were very fancy about it. Because my machines aren't that complex, I didn't want to do that. So we just put them all into FileBeat. You need to select the data view to be FileBeat, because if you select something else like logs, it will say there are no available fields that contain data because nothing's being set there. So if you go down here, it will give you 71 available fields. We are going to create a dashboard. You can scroll down through any of these fields, and I'm going to choose one that is event type because it might have some more interesting data than some of the others. All of the others work just because my stack is so, not stack, but the machines I'm running are so boring. They only have one thing running on it at any time. It might not give you any interesting data. This also doesn't give you a ton of interesting data until you realize that we're looking at the last 15 minutes. And that's maybe a little too short of time. So if I give it the last 5 hours, it will give us something maybe a little more fun. And because it's Java, I have to wait for it to load. Additionally, we can change what kind of charts we're looking at. So these are the suggested charts that it's giving me. These are the ones that it thinks will visualize what I want. I'm going to move over for our purposes to a line chart. And then I'm also on the other axis, so the y-axis, going to add another field. And I'm going to add can't remember what I wanted to add. Event ingested, that's what I wanted to add. And hopefully this will give us a sort of interesting graph. I'm also moving to over time, and hopefully this will load. It is trying to now ingest almost 10,000 events. And it's not liking that. What if I do a hard refresh? Because none of it was saved, it kicked me out. It also reset our settings. So we're back to light mode. But essentially, I think you guys get the gist of it. We can drag the fields in. We can mess with it to make it look how we like. I do want to say something additional, which is another fun type that's going to come in handy. If you go to just dashboard and create a new dashboard, instead of clicking create visualization, you can also create a map, which will have a ton of other things that you can use. I'm putting an emphasis on this for a reason. Back to my slides. This just talks about the data view and how it works. I kind of went through a ton of this. But this was the original graph that I made, just between a couple different, it was the event ingested on the y-axis and the event, or it was both the events ingested and the event type. And it's just graphing the two as a line graph. So this isn't a question for you guys because you don't know, but we're now on to machine 2, where something is going on it. I am currently running an attack on machine 2. There's also probably other attacks being run on machine 2, but I am running one. And a user account was compromised by someone in a different country. So this means that Someone in a different country has gained this user's credentials and is logging in. What country is Ren's attacker logging in from? I suggest, for the purposes of this workshop, that you make a dashboard to try and learn it, and I'm going to hint at the maps. Those are important. So attempt to make a dashboard that shows the different countries. Once you find the country, you can put that directly into UCSec, and it should give you the flag. So it is a whole country name. It is a real country. A fun caveat as well, Ren is from Canada, so you can assume that his attacker is not logging in from Canada. With that, I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes, and then I'll come check in and see how everyone is doing, and possibly give you another 5 minutes. Good luck. I wanted to hop in and give everyone a little hint because I realized you might fall into a trap. They are logging into Ren's account, but the account is an Nginx web page. So if you are looking at SSH data and trying to get that to work, I recommend not doing that and maybe looking at web traffic and Nginx. Of course, always let us know when you get the flag. It just helps us time a little bit. So it's been a little under 10 minutes, no, not by much. So I wanted to hop on and start going through the solution. I know that one person got the flag. Um, Hopefully other people did as well. Um, so if I go to the dashboard and I don't do that, I attempt to make a map, you'll notice there's this add layer function within the maps. And then there's quite a few types of maps. I originally imagined this would be a heat map, but I'll do it two ways so you can see two different views. We have to change the data view here again because it needs to know what the data is, and only FileBeat has data that's being propagated to us. It, by default, tries to choose what it thinks you would want to look at, but we want to look at source location. We want to find who's logging in. Um, I'm also then going to change this from coarse to finest just because it helps us see it a little better, and it's less spread out. You'll see there's tons from Alberta. That's expected because I'm running attacks at it from Ren's logging in from Alberta. Ren is me. But there's also a very faint line up here. And if you're not super well versed in your country names, this is the Netherlands. um, There, it's propping up. It's taking a bit, but it's gonna come. This is the Netherlands, and the attacker lives in Amsterdam somewhere. So the answer was Amsterdam. Um, Funny things, you will now see quite a few other spaces popping up throughout Europe. Not us, not me, someone else. Another way that you could do this, instead of doing a heat map, is you can do top hits per entity, I believe is the one. I feel like I'm going off script. Exactly the same. Do I want entity? I need it. I've gone off script. It's all over. There is a way to see grouped with metrics. We maybe want this one. Clusters and grids, select file beat, and then change it to source. I want a cluster. And it's aggregating theoretically by count. So you can see that over 2,000 requests have been made to that endpoint in Canada. But if we do scroll in back to the Netherlands, we can see it from afar, but it's easier if you see it up close. It also has the most number of hits on this endpoint at 118 right now in Amsterdam. So that's another view that you could make. Does anyone have any questions as I move through these slides? So as I said, we want to make a map because I think that's a nice way to view this. There are probably several other dashboards that could have done this. This is just a nice way to show you what's possible with Kibana other than just bar charts. I originally did a heat map, but the other map with the counts also works very well. We want to do source geolocation with the data view file beat, and then we are able to see that there's been other logins from other places that are not Canada. So now you might have the question of, but I'm still only responding to attacks after they happened. You only know that attacks are running because I told you. This isn't helpful. Like I don't pre-know that attacks are running on a server at any point, which is also, again, correct. But that's why we're going to talk about security rules and alerting. So rules are conditions on the logs that you're aggregating that, when met, trigger an alert. An alert is just a notification that will get pushed to some third-party system, think email, Discord, or Slack, to let the people know on the security team, or just people who care, that something is wrong with the system. So we're going to go back to that original logs live feed view. So if you click the hamburger bar, I'm going to switch my view again. The hamburger menu up in the top left, and you go back down to observability, and then go to logs. I didn't save that map, so it's going to yell at me. I'm fine with it. There is this top piece in the top right of alerts and rules. Oh, geez. I'm going to start running a hack. Anyways, there you can click create rule. You should have the permissions to create a rule from that little bar. When you create a rule, it gives you a couple little fields to fill out. So the first one is the rule name. This one might be a little self-explanatory, but you need to identify the rules and what they're referring to. And also in the message, it typically indicates which alert rule was raised, and it's helpful if those are useful names. As well, it gives you input for how often a rule will be triggered and in what scenarios. There's 3 scenarios. There's one every time it triggers, it will send a notification or it will alert. There's one only when the status changes, and there's another one that I can't remember what it is. I think it's like a special configuration. Um, so basically what I have on this slide is every minute it will check to see if the rule has been matched and the alert has been raised, and then it will try and do the notify if it has changed since the last time it checked. As well, it has the log threshold, and this is where you actually create the rule with fields. And these are just a query that if the query is matched at some point, it will raise the alert, and then possibly you will be notified for it. I want to talk a little bit, this is foreshadowing for the challenge, but alerting in ELK. So this is still in the create rule function. If you scroll down, it has a little section called actions, and you will notice there are a lot of boxes and most of them are grayed out. When I said that Kibana and Elastic are free with a caveat, this is the scenario where they are. They don't let you configure most alerting out of the box unless you pay. We have done something sneaky with a Discord webhook to get around that. So I'm going to teach you how I would like you to set up the alerting for your rules, just so you will be able to get some payout from it. So one of the actions is server log, and we are going to use that to set up the alerts. So if you click that server log button, it then gives you the option to create a connector. You want to click that, and then you will create a connector that runs when fired. You can name it as well. You will want to put the level at which it counts this issue as. I believe that you want it to be one of the higher level ones, like error or fatal is one of them. Pick one of those, it will work better. And then in the message, it will give you a ton of junk just by default. If you can put anything in the message, but I want you guys to put your Discord name along with the identifier, because we are going to send you the flag through DM for your work. This is just the way that we got it working. So if you get an alert raised, an executive will then send you the flag. This alert will be raised in our own actual Discord server. So I'm going to switch my screen and actually show you this. Um, So this is the InfoSec Club UCalgary Discord server. If you scroll down to the category workshop, there should be a text channel called logging and monitoring alerts. Hopefully you guys can see that. That is my hope. There is also a single alert. This is it's from a bot called We're Not Gonna Pay, because we're not gonna pay for alerts. We're gonna do them ourselves. That is sending the alert when it happens. I put in my Discord ID, so it is getting triggered. And then we would send you the flag once you've actually successfully alerted. I'm going to quickly go through these alerts just in real time. So you can create the rule, you can name it anything. It's probably very slow at this point, or at least it's slow for me because I've now been streaming for a couple hours and my Linux doesn't like that. I like to leave it to check every minute. That is okay if you leave it, and I only want it to notify me on status change. You can choose what you want it to notify you on. This is checking when the count of log entries with this field. This should be familiar to the query. You now want to start messing with these fields and make a query that when matched will go off. This is saying there are more than 75 that are errors in the log level. You might want to change that because 75 of what we're looking for might not happen for the last 5 minutes and group by nothing. You then will click server log, move the level to error or warning, get rid of this chunk, and then paste in your Discord ID. And if you save it and that rule then gets matched, you will then get a flag. So we're now moving on to the third machine. So the question is, what is happening on this machine? And I'm going to tell you. A user is attempting to OS inject the machine using netcat. Switching again, making you seasick. This is the actual machine that is running, and this is the actual endpoint that exists. This is, I want to give credit to Steven. It starts with a B. It's called Breakable Flask. He's made a Flask app called Breakable Flask that essentially has tons and tons of vulnerable endpoints. I used it to spin something up quick, but this one is an OS injection. It's meant to be a DNS lookup. So if we look up 8.8.8.8, it will tell us that it will be Google. It is possible to OS inject this. Telling us everything that's on the machine when I ran ls. I am running a script in the background that actively attacks this with netcat. So if I tried to make it realistic, if someone found an OS injection, it would be common to try and netcat back into their own machine so they could have a shell on the server. I want you to get the alarm to be set off to an OS injection of netcat and include your Discord username in the message, and then an executive will send you the flag. My hint is I think you should go into the logs function and find what that maybe looks like. Scrolling down to the bottom of the new ones, you will see this get/lookup from Nginx. Find what the netcat command maybe looks like and maybe look around in the fields to see what kind of field you would want to match. I'm going to leave it at that, and I will give you a hint. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do it, and I will give you a hint at 5. Good luck. It's now been about 5 minutes. I'm going to hop on and give a hint to anyone who's struggling. In all of the requests for this Nginx endpoint, if you scroll down to the bottom when looking at the details section, you'll notice that the URL has two different encodings. There's URL.original and URL.original.text. I recommend looking at this field to match the .text one because again, strings are nice. I know if it's another type that's not a string, it will attempt to get you to match it exactly. If you use URL.original.text, it will let you be a lot more lenient and might get you to the flag. The other thing I'm going to give a hint about is I recommend this be 0, more than 0. It's because you want it whenever log to go off. You have about 5 more minutes. I will try and then run through the rest of this quickly. I know we might go over time. You guys have about 15 seconds left of the 10 minutes, so I'm going to take up the time because we're about to go over time and I'm trying not to. Um, so I'm going to go through what I would have done manually because my slides are a little subpar. I'm going to name this challenge 3. I'm going to keep it to check every minute only on a status change. And the thing that I'm going to change is what I try to give you guys a hint about. So if you change the field to url.original.text, it then asks you to match that. If you look at the logs that are coming in from all these requests, they all say /lookup, address equals, and then something. I'm letting it catch up to my typing. And so I'm looking for it to whenever someone says netcat. So I match /lookup, address equals netcat. As I said before, I want it to be is more than 0, so 1 occurred at all. And then I want to add this message to be my Discord. I'm going to change this to fatal. And then save. And then theoretically, as everyone's goes through, we can see that my rule was triggered almost immediately into the Discord with my username. So that would be how you would make a very simple rule. I do want to say it is people's entire jobs to find out what their roles could be for these servers. We know what's going on this machine, but at no point do you know what attack is going down. So you have to decide what your rules are going to be and how useful they're going to be. Additionally, as we've maybe seen in my logs that are coming in, people attack servers all of the time. That doesn't mean they're getting into servers. There are tons of SSH brute forces being ran against my servers. My servers do not have password authentication on. So there's no feasible way they could get in with a password. They would need my private key somehow. Which ideally they don't have. So they're probably never going to get in. So it's maybe not always good to alert on things. You need to be tactful about how you decide what those rules are, and whether they're actually doing something bad or if they're just trying. That was a fun lesson I think the club learned in our first CTF. So I want to talk a little bit about just learning logging management systems in general. Once you learn one, the others become much easier to learn. You haven't necessarily learned them all. They all have different weird configuration files, the way that they're set up. They're all slightly different, but the interfaces tend to look very similar and you understand the idea of how they work. So looking back on this and after spending a week with ELK, I would not choose ELK again to run this workshop, and it's not something I would personally choose to run maybe in a home lab or if I wanted to learn. It's very clunky and big, and it's meant for businesses, and I'm not a business. I'm just someone who wants to learn. I did want to throw this out there just because if you want to learn this at a deeper level, there is no substitution for setting it up yourself. If you ask in the Discord, if you DM me on Discord, or ask any of the other execs, a lot of us have dealt with these over the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure many people would love to help you set them up, whether it be on your home lab or just be temporary for a minute to just play around, like I tend to do. If you were going to do this, my recommendation would be Grafana Prometheus, and Grafana Loki. It looks, as you can see from the screenshot, similar. It's auto dark mode, which some people will like, but it's incredibly, incredibly similar, and it's just easier to set up and run, and it's also much smaller because it's made for more people like us rather than Microsoft or something. I just wanted to throw that in there because I do really want to encourage people to go out and try this on their own. You will learn so much more that way if you try and set it up yourself. I just wanted to bring up the attendance before we close out. You should fill out our attendance. We'd love to see who's coming to our workshops as well. You need it to vote in our AGM on March 27th. You need to have attended at least half of our workshops in order to be a full member, which gives you voting rights. And we are coming into another election season. So you can either scan this QR code, follow the bit.ly link, or I will try and send the bit.ly link again. Give me a second. But yeah, this has been our first workshop on logging and monitor or on blue teaming in general. It's something I've been trying to get a little into because a lot of jobs relate around blue team. And it's just a fun separate kind of security. Um, a lot of security revolves around. So I hope you guys enjoyed the workshop today. Thank you so much for coming out during busy exam season. And if you have any questions, you can always ask in our Discord or you can DM me directly and I will try my best to answer them if I have the knowledge. um, yeah, that's the end of the workshop. So have a good night, everyone.
Was wird daraus, wenn der Buhne mal tot geht?